introduce Jenn Beck, who is here to teach us about offensive strategies. I'll let you take over the screen.
Okay, thanks. Yep, so as Vicky mentioned, I'm talking mostly about cutting, and I'm kind of focusing on like the downfield movement. There's a bit of handler movement in, but I know Al is going to talk a lot about resets and handler movement on his presentation, so I tried to avoid doing too much. Let's try it. Scared.
Oh, and one thing I forgot to mention, if anyone has questions, just type them into the chat, and then I'll kind of read them out to Jenn so that we can kind of intersperse them throughout the presentation.
Yeah. All right, so I started and restarted this about 3 times because when talking about cutting, there's so many different things you can talk about. So I'm trying to like kind of start off with the very basics and then get into more advanced stuff as the presentation goes on. If there is anything that you wanted to hear about that I didn't mention, feel free to ask a question about it. We could try and talk through it virtually. So just for today, our format, we're going to go through just some quick introductions. And then initially I'm going to talk about our like one-on-one scenarios. So just talking about you trying to beat your defender on the field. And then taking that information, we're going to move it into team scenarios. So putting 7 people all trying to beat their defender on the field, working together at once. For a few things, kind of giving you an opportunity to think through stuff on your own. So if you just want to be able to use that reaction button at the bottom, if I'm asking for like a thumbs up or something, just to let me know that you've had a chance to kind of come to your conclusions about things before we discuss it. And then if I use any terms that you're unfamiliar with, just please comment in the chat and I'll try and clarify those. All right, so to start, my name's Jenn Beck. I started playing Ultimate around 2011 in Halifax. It was my just moved to the city, tried to meet people activity, and then got into it competitively pretty quickly. I've played women's mixed, women's masters and mixed masters at the club level. Also played a fair bit of 4-on-4 and played a fair bit of beach ultimate out east. Not many great beaches in Alberta for playing. And then on the coaching side of things, I initially got into coaching to try and recruit players for my women's team because we didn't have that many. So I started running clinics for the women in Halifax, which led to kind of bringing back our youth club team there, and then moved out to Alberta and was coaching. I coached Fallout there for a few years, and I coached the U of A team as well, and just helped out with clinics throughout the few years when I'm there. And then I moved to Fort McMurray 2 years ago, started running an elementary school program up here in the fall, was supposed to do a couple more this spring. Unfortunately, that didn't happen. And I do have my NCCP training, so I have the competition level 1 certification, and then just the community coach training, as well as a few other courses that go along with those. Well, so for everyone here, if you just want to like give me a thumbs up or a wave just to kind of see, I recognize most names, but don't know everyone there. So is there anyone here that thinks like would consider themselves a new player? Haven't played, maybe played a season of league? Anyone's kind of played a few seasons of league, hasn't done any type of practice or anything like that? Do we have like all club level players here? Yep. Okay. And how many people are playing in a club cohort or the cohort league? Anyone? One? Okay, yeah, we got a couple. Okay. Sounds good. So the first bit might be a bit of a review for all of you, but we'll go through it anyways. So when we talk about playing a point in Ultimate, lots of things can have an influence on it. The weather, of course, the specific matchups, the style of play, different teams, any different things, any of a multitude of things can be influencing the outcome of a point. But if we're going to assume we have 2 relatively evenly matched teams, the weather's not playing a factor, we think offense or defense would typically have the advantage on a given point. So if you want to maybe give me a wave if you think offense. And anyone for defense? All right. So typically the offense will, one, you start with the disc, you need the disc to score. So having that possession immediately would definitely help for that. Also, as an offensive player, you get to decide when you want to cut, where you want to cut, what speeds you want to cut at. So you get that decision-making ability, and primarily the defense is going to react to that. We'll talk a bit later, like the defense can strategize to try and limit those options for you, but typically they are going to be reacting to what the offensive players do. So becoming a good cutter is probably one of the toughest skills I've found to develop. It's the challenge of like being able to defeat that person one-on-one, but also like bringing in the knowledge of how the whole team system is going to work, and taking those skills to beat your player one-on-one and being able to incorporate it into a whole team scenario. Yeah, so with that, I mean, speed obviously helps, but unfortunately only one person gets to be the fastest on the field at a time. And then if you end up playing against a smart defender, that's good positioning on defense definitely helps overcome that speed advantage if you're not cutting smartly. All right, so the first bit we're going to talk about is just winning our one-on-one matchups. So cutting's all about space. So when you're cutting, you're either trying to get yourself into an open space for a pass, or you're trying to create an open space for your teammates to move into. So we're going to look at different ways that you can try to go about winning that one-on-one matchup. How are you going to beat that one person guarding you? We won't bring into account all the other people on the field right now. Oh, can we not hear me? I'm going to keep going, but where was that? So because we're just looking at the one-on-one matchup on the field, we're not going to focus too much on using cutting to make space right now. We're going to look at more trying to get open for a pass. And again, we're going to focus more on the downfield cutters because of Al's presentation later. All right, so in general, there's two components that go into a cut. One of them you kind of always had, and the other one you don't always have, but you combine them together a lot. Anyone have any ideas what they might be? All right, so first one would be a change of direction. So you can change your angles. It doesn't have to be a straight 180-degree turn, but any change of an angle in your movement can help you create that separation from your opponent. And then, yeah, Amy got the other one, change of speed. So that can be both speeding up and slowing down. So you can use those to create separation there. So more often than not, you have a combination of the two. So you could have multiple changes of direction. You could use changing your speed and your direction at the same time. You could speed up, slow down, speed up. So you can use a combination of those there. So we're going to look at a couple of video examples of these in action. All right, so here we're going to look at the white team. There's going to be a turnover on this pass. Keeping an eye on the player right here, looking at the change of direction. Oh, sorry. All right, so if we saw there, the player starts by running, whoa, where are we going? Technical difficulties. Player starts by running full speed away from the disc, makes a quick turn to run back to the disc again at a full speed. So that decision point of like when they're going to make their change of direction, the defender had to react to that, and then that was where they were able to create their spacing to become open. And then the next slide is going to be the change of speed. So we have both an acceleration and a deceleration here. So for this clip, we're going to be watching in the end zone, this pair here. White is on offense again. So we can see there, the player kind of waited, stood still, walked around a bit until they saw that opportunity to come open for a cut, and then it was just a quick acceleration. They didn't have to do a cut to the away side and then back to that sideline to get the disc. It was just kind of a waiting and then a quick acceleration. And then the next example here is just going to be kind of the opposite of that, where you're going full speed initially and then are able to use your deceleration to create space. So we're looking right here. Right. So those are kind of what those look like on the field. Right. So, and again, as I mentioned, in addition to these examples, you can use multiple combinations of change of direction, change of speed to get open. Some of those would be like an S-shaped or a Z-shaped cut. So you have multiple changes of direction. You could use a triangle shape to run multiple cuts. One I really like is kind of like a hesitation type cut. So you're going at a high speed, you slow down as if you're going to change direction, but then you accelerate again along that same line. And then being able to use like head and shoulder fakes is also really valuable when you're trying to get open. Especially if you find your defender is just focusing on you and not really aware of where the disc is. A quick little shoulder fake thinking that you're going to go in the other direction might cause them to lean a bit too much in that direction, and then you can get open in the other direction. Another technique I like to use, if there's no stoppage in play, but the disc isn't in play yet, I kind of just walk around my space I'm in a bit and see how that my defender adjusts their positioning as I move. So if I really slow things down there, then I might be able to see something where I can take advantage of it at a higher speed. All right, so playing really good defense, it takes a lot of focus. So these are going to be a couple tips on just how you can maybe take advantage, recognize when your defender might lose that focus for a second, and then be able to take advantage of it. Once they get at a position, it can be really hard for them to get back in position to make a play and a pass with you. A legal play, they might foul you to get there. So 3 scenarios that I'm going to discuss about taking advantage of your defender being out of position is, so the first one would be if you can get between their inside shoulder and the disc. So what I mean by their inside shoulder is typically the shoulder that they have closest to the disc when they're guarding you. We have a video I'll show you there what that looks like. Second one would be forcing them to turn their hips. So if you can get their hips to basically rotate through 180 degrees, it's a lot harder for them to accelerate out of that movement. And then the third one would be to get in their blind spot. So basically get in an area where they lose sight of you for a second. All right, so this first video is going to be getting between that defender's inside shoulder and the disc. So the disc is right here. We're going to pay attention to this pairing right here. The white player is offense, and then the gray is defense. So just pausing right there. You can see at this point, the player has gotten by that inside shoulder or that shoulder that's closer to the disc. Once they get there, your defender's basically on your back, so they'd have to go through your back to try and make a play on it. So you can see she's got that space, and then there's not really an option for the defender to then make a play on the disc. And more conveniently, you're kind of in a convenient place to have a good look at the downfield after that. And then just looking back at our change of direction video from before. So same idea here. You can see the cutter going out, and as the direction change happens here, closer shoulder to the disc, and they're getting by that line so that they have the option for an open pass. So those are just a few examples of what that looks like on field. All right, so next one we have an example of the defender overcommitting and turning their hips. I think one of our audience members might be featured in this video. So we are looking right around here, and the dark team is on offense here. So just going back. Oh, sorry. Going to watch that again. So just at the, here we go. So just watching here, you can see the defender overcommits, has to turn basically 180 degrees, and then the offensive player has a pretty open pass. Okay, and then our next one is going to be a video getting in the defender's blind spot. So we're going to be watching kind of this area here. Again, dark's on offense, the disc will be around here. So just in that quick second there, you were able to kind of step back where the defender couldn't see you, and then you have the option for a cut. Once you get in that blind spot, you can kind of go in either direction, and they have like the reaction time is even longer from that point. Where are we at? Sorry, losing my notes. All right. All right, so as we mentioned at the beginning, defense sometimes will just match up really tight to you and just kind of try to always react to what you're doing. But then other times they may set up a team strategy or maybe an individual strategy against a player to say, we're going to try and take away this option. So we're going to look at ways to recognize that. And then also kind of think about what options are remaining afterwards, and are those good options to take. So when I think about a good option to take, I'm kind of looking at something of like, if I get a pass here, are we gaining yards downfield? Are we gaining yards on the break side of the field? So those are kind of good places to move the disc, as opposed to something of like, if I catch a pass here, am I putting myself in the position that I have really reduced throwing angles? Are they going to have an option to trap me like on the sideline or something like that? So those are kind of things to look at, like, okay, the defense is taking away this option, they're leaving me this other option. Is it something that's worth me having to take? Or should I try and fight for my original choice or another option that isn't one of those two? And then kind of with those options, depending on how the defense is positioning, do you still need to use your full speed? Do you need to use a hard change of direction cut to actually receive those passes? And again, there's like many other factors that go into play with positioning on defense, but we're going to assume for the next few clips that the thrower has the option to make all of the throws available to them, and then there's not going to be like a huge downwind or side to side wind available for them. So we can assume that like a deep throw is an option, or a throw to a break side throw is going to be an option without being knocked over at the wind, like Nationals last year. Right. I have a few drawings out here, so just a legend of what the symbols mean. So the big yellow arrow is going to be the direction of play. So that's pointing towards the end zone the offense is trying to throw at. Blue trapezoid is going to be our defensive player. If they're on, they'll be obviously on either side of the thrower to kind of indicate the force. White X's are our offensive player. Yellow circle is going to be our disc, and then the blue dotted arrow is going to be the cutting direction. There'll also be some various shapes of shaded pink, which is kind of going to be the active cutting zones that we're talking about. All right, so first example here. So we have our thrower and a disc, and then we have offensive cutter and a defender here. So just take a second or two to look at that. Think about, what is the defender trying to take away? what options are remaining from those without taking what they're trying to take away, and then are those good options to take, or should you try and find another option instead? So just take a minute to think about that once you feel like you've come to a conclusion. If you want to give me a thumbs up or a wave or anything like that. Thanks, Danny. I did try and use Edmonton Teams. It was a struggle to find good video at times, but a lot of them focusing just on the thrower, which is hard when you're doing a presentation on cutting. Okay, I've got a few thumbs up, so we'll go from here. So we can see here the defense is trying to take away a deep cut. So maybe you've already burned them deep a couple times and the team's like, nope, you can't let that person get open deep anymore. We're gonna have to force them under. So with that, we are still leaving undercutting options. So I've kind of highlighted this areas where you could potentially catch a pass. We don't necessarily need to move into the backfield. Yes, it's there, but again, we're going more to the force side and we're losing yards. So if we can get something that's upfield or to the break side, it would be a bit more beneficial to you and the rest of your team there. With this, I've heard a lot of like, you always have to set up your cuts. You don't necessarily need to do a full like hard 5 steps out or something like this in a scenario. Something like a jab step or a quick shoulder check and an acceleration would work fine. You already have the space by your defender. If you're, my dog's snoring really loud. If you're gonna move into the open space up here, like why would you make this advantage you already have smaller? So this is something you don't necessarily need to do for that. All right, and then we have another clip here just showing kind of a similar situation. The offensive player is going to have a situation where the defense is taking away a deep cut, and so they don't need to run into the defense and then back out to get an open pass. They just kind of move into the empty space. So they're looking to move off sideline. They will come into the screen around here. So you can see here the defender's backed off a bit, and then all the offensive player has to do is just move towards the center of the screen. You don't need to make a hard cut out and a hard cut back to get an open pass that benefits your team. Right. All right, scenario 2. So same thing as the first one. If you want to take a minute or two, think about what the defender's taking away, what cutting options you have remaining, and are those good options to take? Okay, so this is kind of the opposite of the first one. Here, your defense is taking away that undercut or the cut towards the disc. So they are leaving the outcut or the deep cut here. So again, you have a pretty wide range of space that you can throw into. Depending on your thrower, you may be able to get something over in this area as well. But whoop, you have that option of going out in multiple directions for a throw there. All right, and then third scenario. So same idea, what are they taking away? What's remaining? Are they good options to take? All right, so here we have the defender is trying to take away upfield throws to the theoretical other people on the field. So they're poaching off of this other handler right now. So this space here, like we talked about before, you're going right towards the sideline. If you take that flat pass there or slight loss of yards, the way it's set up, you're not really doing anything that's going to benefit your team hugely unless it's a super high stall count and you have no other option. So with this, it might be a good idea to instead try and look to move to a position where you can get the disc here, either on the break side or you could move upfield, so either into the player. So this is a scenario kind of the opposite of before, where we're saying you don't necessarily need to cut deep into your player to come back. But here, by making this movement, you might be able to get a pass up in this area depending on how they react. But if not, you could also just move them out of the way for your teammates to then move into that space. So those are a couple options there where it might not be best to just take what the defense is giving you, but instead move your body into a position where you can receive a pass, but it's also going to benefit your team a bit more. And then we have a video example of this one here. So disc is right here, white has it, and we're going to keep an eye on this position here. So you can see here that the defender is already a fair bit of distance off of the handler there. So we're just going to keep an eye on the movement here. So you can see there immediately how they moved to the break side. They didn't get that pass right away, but they took the defender out of the way. And then it just so happened that the defender overcommitted on the fake. And then you got that easy offline cut where they were able to catch it. Again, similar position to where you are, center of the field, up a few yards, and you get a fresh stall count to work with. So those are just a few different scenarios about how you can kind of recognize what the defense is giving you and then try and think about whether taking that is a good idea or if you might want to try and look for a more advantageous position for you. Cool. All right. So as we talked about before, like speed's definitely helpful, but it's not the only thing you should rely on when cutting. So there'll be one person on the field that's the fastest on the field, but probably everyone else can work on getting a bit faster and working on your footwork and your starts and stops and things like that to improve your cutting. So some different ways that you can improve your cutting technique. So I think about half or 2/3 there are playing in some sort of league or practice right now. So I have a couple tips for a practice. So if you're scrimmaging, challenge yourself. So match up against someone that you know that's faster than you and force yourself to rely on having that good footwork, pushing yourself to run a bit faster, position yourself a bit better. So you have that added challenge of knowing, okay, this player is a bit faster than me, but I'm going to play a bit smarter to be able to get open against them. Also will help your defense too, but that's a different topic. Also, when you go out, so instead of going around and throwing, which I don't know, is that a rule for our leagues that we're not throwing before practice anyways? I know it's somewhere in return to play guidelines anyways, I don't remember which one. But use your warm-up time to work on your footwork. So I got a like $15 ladder off Amazon a couple of years ago. Like you get something of that, you can just make up ladder marks on the field, use change of direction drills, practice your starts and stops. Things like that. If you aren't playing in a league or a practice group right now, on your own, practice running fast. So jogging, biking, swimming, all those activities, they're great. They build up like a general base level of fitness, but you're not going to get better at running fast unless you actually run fast. So go find a straight stretch, run some sprints, practice some quick changes of direction, do some ladder drills, practice your footwork, practice push, like changing direction off of both feet, again, going forwards, backwards off of both feet, things like that. And then kind of the opposite of that, slow it down to be able to speed things up. So really break down the footwork for the changes of direction, the footwork for your starting and your stopping, getting used to like taking quick steps to be able to change direction. So those little things that you can do on your own if you're not actually playing right now would help when you get out on the field. If you get a copy of this, I have a couple YouTube channels that have ultimate specific agility drills in them. But in general, if you just search like ladder drills or ultimate frisbee agility or anything like that on YouTube, a bunch of stuff shows up. So just kind of take what you like from there. If you want to get more serious about it, talk to someone who knows more about training than I do, and they can help you out, but those are all options. Also, on top of that, if you have the option, weight training definitely helps as well with the stamina to be able to do this safely, to be able to have a bit more power in your accelerations and whatnot, like that. So when I consistently started lifting, I found I definitely was able to cut a lot harder through multiple games.
And Jen, would you say because you've practiced the movements ahead of time, then for injury prevention, like especially that's a big deal, right? Folks who
Yeah,
want to be
definitely.
out for the season because you've twisted an ankle or hurt your knees.
Yeah, I've lost 2 seasons to knee injuries already. So this after the second one, I did the fast program, and I definitely felt it was huge for like the same thing, slowing down to speeding it up. So we went through like all the changes of direction, landing, starting, stopping, in really slow motion, kind of getting your body used to making those movements so that you don't need to think about it on the field. So if you can get to the point of like you can do things fast enough on your own and think about reacting to things outside of the field, then once you get in a game scenario, your body's going to be a bit more used to making those movements as opposed to having to like think about cutting there, like, oh, my legs are so tired right now, and you really need to work hard on like moving them to cut. If you have that practice and the fitness level there, it's going to be a lot easier on you. All right, does anyone have any questions on what we've covered so far?
Would you say, I know a lot of the scenarios that you've presented are more of a 7-on-7 scenario.
Yep.
Because of the cohorts right now, we're running, 6-on-6, 5-on-5. So
Yep.
would you say, is there kind of small adaptations? I know you had like a no-mo clip, which was a 4-on-4 game. So
Yep.
does it all kind of apply in a similar way?
So what I've done so far, which is like trying to outmatch one player, yeah, it can apply to any different type of playing. The next bit, we're going to go into some more typical offensives that we would have run already. And in those, I'm going to talk a bit about like if you're playing 5-on-5, you're playing 6-on-6, you could use these adaptations to run like a horizontal stack or a vertical stack or things like that. So the like typical movements you want to use to try and get open against someone are kind of pretty standard across, like the variations of the game you play, but the team movements can change a bit depending on the number of players on the field.
And then just one other question is, I know a lot of us, even though we're more like say on club level, but we're often coaching newer people on a team.
Yeah.
So, with newer players, you don't want to give them all the information at once. So what would you say would be the kind of top 3 that you want to give someone who's just, who goes to you and says, I don't know where to cut, where do I go, what do I do? What would be your advice for those folks?
So yeah, first one, you kind of touched on it, like make sure they actually want help. So if you're playing in your league, some people don't care or want your advice. So make sure it's something where they come up and actually ask for that help. But I would say just kind of watch them for a couple points first and see if you can see if there's a specific thing. So if they're like maybe missing an opportunity where they're standing in front of the disc a lot and they don't recognize that that's a place where they can clear, or if they're a little late or early on cuts, you can kind of help them out with the timing on there. So it's tough to say like a top 3, but I would say just kind of get a gauge of like where their skill set lies, and you might be able to find a couple things specific to them initially. But yeah, don't pick more than a couple, because then you get the like, oh, try this next time and try this next time and try this next time. And then you also have like 4 other people on your team telling them all the same things. And I'd say it can get a bit more overwhelming. So yeah, I try like with newer players, let them guide how much you help them.
Would you say it's more helpful for them to pay attention to where their defender is versus worrying about everyone else on the field?
I'd say kind of focus more on like what they're doing on offense as opposed to defense initially. So just say like, okay, and when you're in this position, which we'll talk a bit more later on too, this is a good opportunity to cut deep, or this is a good opportunity to cut under, or here you like have a really good opportunity to score, things like that. So yeah, I'd say more focus on like what they're doing themselves before thinking about reacting to the defense.
We've got a question from Teresa. So any general tips on attacking the break side?
I would say with that, it's timing's really important with it. So you kind of have that like split second opportunity where the thrower has that throw to the break side, and just encouraging it. So even if you have newer players on your team, newer throwers, still cut to the break side for them. It gives them a bit more opportunity to look to that space. And then as throwers, look to throw to the break side to kind of encourage your teammates to cut there. But I think the biggest thing with it is just getting that timing down right. So if you're a bit too early, then you're kind of sitting there taking away that cut from someone else. Is that answering your question, Teresa? Thanks. Anything else? All right, we'll move on. So now we're looking at.
Emily had a question here. And she says, maybe this will come up in the next section, but what happens if your cut is not successful?
Yeah, we'll come up to that. So it's basically like learning where the good places are in your offense to rest and where the good places are to clear, which I will cover in like the next 6 slides. All right, so just some general cutting lines. So to start off, like where are we at? Talking from the beginning, the offense has the advantage. So we kind of increase that advantage by maximizing space that each player has. So in a typical field game, we're playing 7-on-7. That might change a bit right now, but if we can take that 7-on-7 and kind of break it down into like a 3-on-3, a 4-on-4, or a 5-on-5 scenario, that's giving those individual players a lot more space to work with, as opposed to trying to control 7 moving on the field at one time. As I've mentioned before, it's cutting within team scenarios, I think, is one of the hardest things that, like, I found it the hardest when I started, and even many years into playing, just because there are so many moving pieces and timing is so important with it. So you need to have those skills that we've talked about already. So being able to like recognize when your defense kind of slips and take advantage, have that like footwork, be able to change direction, accelerate, decelerate really quickly, but then also make sure that you're not doing that at a time when your teammate's also trying to do that into the same space. And again, like there's many different ways to play Ultimate, right? There's not going to be like a set of rules outside of the rule book that you need to follow. So like I learned how to play in Halifax, and then I moved to Edmonton, and I found the style was very different. And it definitely took me a while to kind of adapt to that. And then I kind of felt like I made an old hybrid style that worked for me, that kind of fit in things that I took from Halifax that would help me play here, but then also be able to play in a way that I'm not going to be like messing up everyone else's style of play here. So I think it's important to like recognize that there's multiple right ways to do things, and also kind of be open to taking feedback on different ways, and that can kind of help you improve like your whole game as a player yourself. So within team offense, you kind of want to ensure that you're making movements that are going to give you a good throwing option, or creating a good throwing option for your teammates. So having a general idea of where to cut to is definitely helpful, especially if you're playing like the cohort leagues where it's a draft team and you haven't played with those people a lot. Just some general guidelines of like, okay, this is a good space to cut deep, this is a good space to cut under, this is a good space to clear, is definitely helpful in like building that chemistry to start. So we're going to start here. First option, so if you find you're here standing directly in front of the disc, what might be a good place you can cut to? If you have an idea, put in the chat, give me a thumbs up or anything like that. All right, so if you're in front of the disc and this close, you don't really have an option to cut towards the disc because you're already that close. So if you have to start moving and then continue to move for a pass, you're probably going to run over the thrower at that point. We don't have a ton of room on this force side here, so your probably best option is to cut to the break side. This is potentially a throwing option, but more often than not, it's going to be that clearing option. So you may have ended up there because the disc moved, or you may have ended up there, kind of going back with Emily's question before. It may have been a cut that didn't work out. Your defender happens to be right with you, and then you need to clear some space for someone else to cut into. So second scenario, what if you're starting here? So we're on the break side, we're upfield from the disc a bit. Take a second to think about what might be some good options to cut to. I will throw it to you, Teresa, I promise. Yeah, so I think we got a couple there. So yeah, you can either go deep or you have that swing pass around into the backfield as well. And then once you have this cut here started, you also have the option of cutting under. Both of these are a bit more advantageous than a straight lateral cut here, because if you're making this movement here, the range of error for that throw is pretty small, as opposed to coming out here. And then if you decide, oh, I'm not going to get open deep, and you want to come back here, you have a bit more of a catching radius than if you were to cut straight across there. All right, so let's say we end up now, we're deep, we're 20 plus yards away from the disc. So what options do we have for cutting now? All of them. Yep. So I guess one thing you don't want to end up doing is standing still there and waiting, because you're taking away that space for someone else to cut to. Your defender's probably going to be a bit in front of you by this point, so you're basically taking away a deep cutting option for the other 5 people on the field, or 4 or 3, depending on where you're playing. So you want to come towards the disc, but you have open side, break side, you can come up the middle. Generally, from there, you can see what everyone else on the field is doing. So just find some open green space and run to it. So this would apply with a variety of type of offensive sets, depending on your team strategy. There may be a little differences in what your team wants to do. But yeah, in general, if you're staying in front of the disc, you want to cut laterally to get out of the way. Occasionally, you could also cut out. If you find you're on the break side, you have an out or a swing pass. And if you find you're deep, come under. Nope. All right. So we're going to look at a few different types of offensive sets right now. The first one's going to be an isolation type offense. You don't see this in league a ton, but it transitions well from the one-on-one cutting stuff that we've been talking about initially. So how this was set up, so you, in this first scenario, you have your thrower, you have a stack of 5 people off to either sideline, and then you have 1 player in the middle here. That's your isolated player. So this offense is basically set up to give that 1 player free reign of basically this giant pink rectangle. Use whatever strategy you want, change the speed, change the direction, S-cuts, running around in circles, whatever you want to do to try and beat your defender in that one-on-one space for a throw. In general, these players are going to look for the secondary cuts off there. I've played on teams where they just say, just stay there the whole time and let these 3 people play 3-on-3. So it depends on how your team sets it up. Do that. Similarly, you can do it in kind of a more horizontal version where you have 3 players that just go back, sit in the end zone, and you have this 1 player in the middle who has kind of the full width of the field to work with, but not necessarily the deep space. So in both of these scenarios, like, this player gets priority. Depending on how your team sets it up, you could say they have priority until they like physically communicate, okay, you are going in for me, I'm out, I'm tired, I can't get open. Right. Yeah, so within these offenses, you're going to have some pros and cons. So within, where are we at? The benefits of running an isolation type of offense. So it definitely limits the number of moving pieces. So you could play 2-on-2, 3-on-3, 4-on-4, depending on how your team sets it up. You have maximum space for that isolated player. So they have free reign of one side, 2/3 of the field to the end zone, or the full width of the field, depending on how you set it up as a team. And you can really exploit mismatches with that. So let's say you know you have a player on the other team who might not be that strong of a defender. You could just on the line say, okay, whoever that player is guarding is our isolated player. And then they get that space to kind of hopefully take advantage of that mismatch. On the other side of it, if that player can't get open, you kind of have a jumble of people in one part of the field, and it might be tough for them to get back into the play. One, especially with newer teams and leagues, if you're always on that sideline or in that deep space, you can get disengaged from the game pretty quickly if you're not involved in the play. And it was especially like when I first started out, it was nice that people actually threw to me. So I enjoyed it a lot more. But if you're always just standing on the sideline being like, okay, this person's better than you, they're going to go get open, you're probably going to risk losing people wanting to play. And then if you're playing against a team that has like a smart defender on there, they might realize, okay, well, my player's just standing over on the sideline. They're not really involved in the play. So I'm going to go over and help out this player that's defending the isolated cutter. So now you're kind of playing 1-on-2 instead of 1-on-1. So it's going to be a lot tougher for you to get open. All right, so next one that might be a bit more familiar would be a vertical stack. So within 7-on-7 can look like this. If you're playing, even within 7-on-7, I've seen this played with 1, 2, or 3 handlers. So you can move around with what you have there. If you have more handlers, it's a bit more space for the downfield people, but then you can also end up a bit more clogged back here. So we kind of figure out what works with your team. If you're playing 6-on-6 or 5-on-5, you could just say 6-on-6, you could do 2 handlers, 4 cutters. You could do 3 handlers, 4 cutters, 1 handler, 5 cutters, and then 5-on-5, same idea. So there's many different ways that you can still run a vertical stack without 7 players. So in this, as opposed to the isolation where there was 1 dedicated spot, we have both sides are kind of our active cutting zones. And then this space in the middle is kind of the rest zone. So if, going back to Emily's question, you cut and you don't get open and it's not successful, go back to this rest zone, because that way you're likely not cutting people off. With this one, we don't, because everyone's kind of involved in the offense, you want to really rely on your communication to make sure it runs smoothly. So what we don't want to happen is everyone cuts at once and then we have people all over the field. So we have 5 people here, they all have defenders on them. Our cutting options are really limited. So we want to make sure if we're looking at an offense like this, that we chat before and be like, okay, this person or whoever is 3rd in the stack or X or Y is what we're going to do first. And if that's not open there, you can always stand in the stack and be like, I'm cutting next. Like having that communication with your teammates when you're cutting, the benefit of that definitely outweighs any like detriment of the defense knowing what you're going to do. Because even if they know like I'm cutting next, I still decide when I'm cutting, where I'm cutting, and like what speed I'm cutting at, right? So you can never really talk too much while you're on the field. So instead, we're back in our nice, neat stack. A couple cutting options that could work out of this. So if you're on the front of the stack, you could do a quick cut to the open side and then across to the break side. This cut doesn't work as well in the back positions because you kind of have to go through and there's a really high chance of picks unless you have a stack that's really, really spread out. Another option from basically anywhere in the stack would be that out and under cut, or the opposite side, that under and out cut. So I have it off the back here. You could have the 4th, 3rd, 2nd, 1st player do it. They could also do it on the break side. So you have lots of options there, a lot of them looking like those triangles that we talked about on the first slide after the break. So saying if you're in front of the disc, you go slash. If you're on the break side, you go deep. If you're on deep, you come under. So a lot of cuts from a vertical stack look like triangles. All right, so what are our benefits of a vertical stack? So we have the whole team's going to be a lot more engaged than in that isolation offense. So it's definitely a better option, especially if you have new players or players you're not used to playing with. It's not as like obviously limiting as an isolation, but you can definitely limit the number of moving pieces. You can say like only like one first person in the stack cuts first, only 1 person cuts at a time, or no more than 2. You have those throwing options on both the open side and the break side, and it actually transitions well into an end zone stack pretty well because you're still looking for that line of cutters in the middle of the field. But on the other side of it, if your throwers aren't comfortable with break throws, which you can get in league, you then cut yourself down to like 1/3 of the field that you can throw to because you're clogging up the middle with your stack. You can't hit the break side, so you only have that open side to cut to. Depending on how you set your stack up and how people move out of it, you can cause a lot of picks. And then again, if your cuts aren't successful and you don't go back to that resting spot, then you lose a lot of cutting space if the players aren't in position there. Also, if you get into like a scenario of you have a defense that's pretty used to playing against each other, but the cutters that aren't as used to working well with each other, that defense can kind of play a team defense against a vertical stack pretty easily. All right, and then
could you adjust your angle if you have a newer team, knowing that the break side is going to be harder to throw to make more field space?
Yeah, so say we're struggling to get this back, we can move these guys all over here. Again, depending on your defense, they may adjust off of that, saying, well, I know this player is not even going to throw to this side of the field anyways, and they can back off a bit more, but that's definitely a way that you can attack the fact that you can't throw to that break side as well. And that kind of gets into the isolation version there, where you have kind of everyone over here, and then this player is coming off. So if you have that scenario of, okay, whoever this person is guarding, that might look like a vertical stack when we start, and then everyone else just moves off to the side. So they kind of go hand in hand there. All right, and then next option we have is horizontal stack. So opposite of vertical stack, we have 4 cutters spread across the field. And then variations of setting this up. Typically have 3 handlers. I haven't played on a team that's run a horizontal stack in a different way, but you can set up how your cutters are. So you could have 4 across the field. You could have 2, like a pocket of 2 here, a pocket of 2 here. You could do 3 and 1, different variations off of that. The active cutting space for a horizontal stack. So this kind of area is your resting area, and then you're looking to catch pass in these 2 pink boxes here. So either in the under space or in the deep space. So similar to our vertical stack, if you have everyone moving at once, it kind of clogs things up really easily and limits your throwing options. So typically a way to set this up is you say, okay, the 2 players that are closest to the disc can have cutting priority. Again, depends on your team strategy. They may say the 2 people on the home side, the 2 outside cutters, but I like as a good default, like especially if it's not off of a dead disc, just be like, if you're one of the people in front of the disc, you get cutting priority. So in this scenario, the disc is in the middle. You could say these 2 players would have priority for cuts, where the 2 on the outside would be looking for those secondary cuts. So they're looking for a pass off of what one of these 2 players catching the disc. So typical cuts to come out of that, you could have a player doing a slash, so something a bit more lateral across the field. And then you could have someone doing an out cut or an out and under, things like that. Again, can be something that's easily communicated that's going to benefit your team a bit more. So if this player is here and they're just like, I'm slashing, again, they get to decide when they get to do it. They get to pick that exact angle. So the benefit of this player knowing, okay, me slashing is probably not a good idea because you're going to run it on into each other, outweighs any detriment of the defense knowing that's what's going to happen. If the defense decides, well, they're going out of the way, I'm going to sit here, then you still have that throwing option. Right, and then as I mentioned, these outside players would look for those secondary passes off of ideally one of these 2 getting the disc. Or if they don't get the disc, both their cuts are unsuccessful, they can look for a higher stall count pass as well. All right, so again, there's benefits to horizontal stack. Similar to the vertical, it's more engaging for everyone than isolation, and you can limit the number of moving pieces. The deep space in horizontal stack is definitely more accessible than in a vertical, where you have potentially 5 people in that vertical stack, spreading out enough that you have that space to cut. That player at the back is probably going to have their defender behind them. So they're kind of available there to peel off on any deep throw. And it's a bit harder to play against if you use that whole width of the field in a team defense scenario than a vertical stack would be. But again, the resting space in a horizontal stack is kind of harder to find than the vertical stack. So you can have cutters being too short or too long and it's kind of really limiting your throwing options. Also, the resting space can change a lot. So if the disc moves and you were like in that right depth, you could then be standing directly in front of it and taking away cutting options for someone else. So it's a bit tougher to be like, okay, I need a space to take a break, because that might constantly change. And then because of that, the clearing cuts are a lot more important in that stack versus the others. Okay. So the next few slides, we just have some screenshots of a few games happening, and kind of going back before, take a second to like look at them and see what cutting options you think might be there, whether it's going to be a cut to get the disc or a clearing cut. All right, so here's the first one. So white is on offense, the disc is right here. So I have, can you guys all see A, B, C, D, E? Yeah, so kind of 5 different offensive players on the field. So if you kind of think, look at 1 or 2 of them, maybe if there's a position you like to play, look at that position and think about what options they might have right now to make some cuts. And then just send me a thumbs up or a wave if you've gotten a chance to think through it. All right, so a few options you could have out of this scenario. So one kind of big one that needs to happen, player C right here, they're kind of standing right in front of where the disc is being. The defense is still running down, so they'll get there in a second. So they need to make a clearing cut to clear that space for everyone else to work with. So you can kind of see they're already in process of heading over in this direction. A couple other options we have. So because the disc is in the middle here, B and D are kind of the 2 closest. So they're in a horizontal set right here. So they're kind of the 2 closest cutting options there. So they should be looking for that first pass. E over here is not one of the 2 closest there. So they might be looking for a secondary pass off of that. So they might cut a bit downfield first, or they might kind of wait and watch and see what's happening between these 2 players here. And then this player A up here. So they want to make sure that they're not going to be getting a pass in a bad position. So getting stuck on this sideline. And then once their defender makes it down the field, like trying to keep them engaged. Anyone have anything else I didn't mention? All right, and so what actually ends up happening here is this player here cuts across, and then this player cuts out, and they end up getting a pass here afterwards. All right, next scenario. So blue's on offense, disc is right here. And so we have 3 players down here. So what options do we think we have with them? They're in a bit more of a vertical set versus the horizontal from last time. All right, so if we look at A here, so their defender is here. So they have a bit of open space, so they can kind of look to, depending on your matchup, like if this player knows they're way faster than this one, they have that option to go deep. They're also in a great position that they can see what B and C are doing, so they can kind of look to play off of that. But yeah, just kind of staying there, seeing what's happening. They also have this space. B again, their defender is here. So they're looking to, they can go out and under and fill in here, or they could go and fill into this break side. And then this player C here, they're a bit deeper to start. So cutting deep might not be their best option unless they know they have a big speed advantage there, but they do have a lot of options to either come fill into this space or they can fill into the backfield as well. So those are 3 options there. Anyone get anything else? I think what happened here is this player got open up line. So none of them worked, but they all made great cuts, I'm sure. All right, and then next scenario. So there was a lot of sideline people here, so those are the brown boxes. So the disc is right here. White is on offense going in that direction. And then we have 3 players on this side and then 2 players on that side. So what options might they have? All right, so first couple we have both A and B here. I grouped them together. They're in that position where they're standing right in front of the disc and they're pretty close, so they should both look to clear out. A cut deep from here isn't the best angle to throw to. They could make a clear cut across and then look to cut deep off of that. Both are options. And then player C here, they're a bit farther away from the disc, so they might have that option for a little like jab step and then a catching a pass in here where they're still going to gain about 15 yards or so. Or they could go out with these players, or they could delay a second after A and B and then have fill into this space here, getting the disc off the sideline. And then D and E over here. So they're in a good position where they're not going to be in the way with any cuts they make right now, but they could both look to move into the space cleared by A and B and maybe C, or they could look for those second passes off of one of those players getting. All right, so despite everyone doing a great job communicating on the field, you're definitely gonna run into scenarios where you have 2 people trying to cut to the same space, and kind of focusing on cuts for a pass versus clearing cuts. So a clearing cut, if 2 people make a clearing cut in the same area, that's not as much of a negative impact as opposed to 2 people trying to make a cut for a pass into the same location. So when you have those scenarios, like how do we determine who has priority to that space? And again, it's like super scenario specific. We're going to go through a few scenarios, but there's going to be like hundreds more that come up through a game that you kind of have to just adapt to as they come. But a couple things you want to take into account of that. So the first one's safety. So is there a potential for a collision to happen by these 2 players continuing to the same space? So that's like always the number 1 thing you want to take into account there. What's the stall count? Is it a high stall count? In that case, handler should almost always have priority versus a lower stall count where it can be a bit more debatable. Relative position of players. So kind of what I mean from that is, does one player have a better view of the situation to react to it better? And you'll see in one of the scenarios, like you can see one player would obviously be able to see what the other cutter is doing, as opposed to that second cutter having no idea that the other cutter is kind of starting that. And then potential benefits. So if player A gets the pass versus player B, is that going to benefit our team more? So those are kind of a few things you want to take into consideration in those types of scenarios. So first one we have here, so we're in a horizontal stack and both A and B cut deep. So we're going to assume that the stall count's low here. So take a minute or 2, think about which player might have priority to make that cut and why. Think about, is there a safety reason for that or not, and what you think would be the best options here. All right, so in this scenario, player A, provided they leave at the same time or very close to, player A should have a view of what player B is doing. So that gives them that good opportunity to kind of play off of it. So if player B continues to cut deep, player A can then cut under into that space, or vice versa. If they say player B cuts out and then it goes under pretty quickly, they have the option of continuing deep there. So there's not really any issue of potential collision unless a disc goes up and player A will flat out plow over player B, but that's a like you need to have a chat with your teammate conversation as opposed to a poor like choice on the field. So yeah, in this scenario, you should give priority to this cut here just because this player has a view of what the other player is doing and be able to keep track of it. If it's a scenario that A takes off earlier and then are downfield and B has that view of A, then they can then play off of what player A does. Okay. All right, next scenario. So we have disc on the sideline. So we have player A is a handler that's cutting up line, and then player B is a cutter that was coming under towards the disc. So think about this in both a low stall count and a high stall count situation. Which player might have priority and why? All right, so first one with this is potentially a big safety issue. So with player A cutting here, assuming they've checked before they started their cut, once they start, they're going to be looking back at this player. So they won't really be able to see anything that's happening downfield here. So in that case, where this player is likely going to be able to see that someone else is moving up, you need to bail out there and not cause an accident. There's also some onus on the thrower here, recognizing, okay, there's potentially two people coming into the same space here. And if you throw a bad pass, you could lead people running into each other as well. So you get a lot of like those, in a windy conditions, you could end up with like the hospital pass scenario down here where B bailed, but their defender noticed, so they came back, and then player A didn't actually see the defender there and ends up plowing them over. So it's just a scenario of it can potentially go very badly. So if you are this player here coming under and you see this player's already started to move, you should probably bail out in your cut here so you can kind of move over to in this direction. If it is early in the stall count and this player is far enough away, so if you're gaining enough yards, you can still continue that cut because this upline cut shouldn't go that deep. And then again, if it's late in the stall count, this player should have priority because it's a handler cut. We're looking at the disc off the sideline and continue moving. I'm sure Al will talk more about that in a couple of weeks. All right, and then next scenario. So we have two players from the middle of a vertical stack and they're both going deep at the same time. And this one's kind of similar to that horizontal stack we had initially. So here player B has a view of what player A is doing. So they can make that decision to play off of what they're doing. It's probably the best choice for player B if you see A is also going is to come under pretty quickly. The reason being is that if A decides to come under and you're already going deep, that's a pretty high chance that there's going to happen and you won't get any benefit out of it anyways. So if you're in a vertical stack and you see someone also going deep in front of you, turn around. If you're not open, come back into that stack and wait for another opportunity. And then last one we see, we're in the, so this is the end zone here. So we have, again, handler coming up line and then person at the front of the stack cutting to the sideline for a pass. This is a pretty common one, I would say, if we get the disc on this kind of like quarter of the field closest to the sideline within 5 or 10 yards. You get that a lot of like, we need to jam it in this tiniest possible space ever that we see. So this is similar to the handler upline cut we had where once this player starts their cut, they're going to be looking back in this direction, so they won't really be able to see too much of what's happening in here. So if you're this player in the end zone and you want to make that cut, you make sure it's early enough that there's no way that there's a potential collision happening there. If this player's already started moving, you got to hold up and wait, and you can either fill in from here or continue around this side depending on where this comes. Cool. All right, so ways we can practice getting better at it as a team cutter. So within your league or practice, try and actually like make an effort to think about what you're doing on the field. So think, okay, I'm going to cut deep here because of this, or I'm going to cut for this swing pass here, or I'm making a clearing cut here because I'm going to be in the way of my teammates. So just like going through that like dialogue in your mind of what you're actually doing. Again, similar to like the slowing down, the cutting technique stuff. Once you like talk through it a bit more, it becomes a bit more automatic, and your brain will be like, okay, this is the position where I'm in the way, I need to clear. And you don't need to think about what you're doing as much. I get a lot of like, I'll come off the field after a point and someone's like, what did you do there? What'd you do that? I'm like, I don't remember. I'm sorry. I don't know what I'm doing on the field half the time. It's like I'm in the zone. And then once I come off, I forget what happens, which isn't great for learning from it. But another thing you can do with at your league or your practice is work on your communication. So as good as your like footwork can be, as fast as you can be, that communication with your teammates is what's going to make everyone better cutters. So while you're on the field, having those conversations of, okay, I'm cutting next, I'm clearing here, I'm going to get out of the way. But then also on the sideline, like talking through, say you have a new player that wants help, tell them where to go. By teaching someone else how to improve on something, that's how you get a lot better. I got way better at playing once I started coaching. If you're not playing in a league or you want to spend some more time at home, watch videos. So I have a few links in this slide as well, down below, of Ultimate Canada, USA Ultimate, different YouTube channels that have a bunch of full game footage. So when you're watching those, don't just watch the disc, although the camera watches the disc a lot of the times and it's very frustrating trying to find clips of cutting. Try and pick a player on the field, especially if you know someone that plays a similar position from you, and watch them. And take little like tidbits of their game that you like and try and incorporate it into your own. And then I kind of touched on a couple of these though, but if you're playing in league, just a couple tips, get back into it. So if you want to take some things here, hopefully I've helped you learn something. Don't try and take everything at once. Focus on one skill at a time. So it's like, okay, today I'm going to focus on like making really fast stops when I'm making my cuts. Instead of like, well, I need to stop quickly and change direction, and I need to make sure I'm clearing, and I need to pay attention to what's going on over here and what my teammates are doing. Focus on one thing at a time. It'll be a lot easier to improve on that instead of getting overwhelmed with trying 7 new things at one time. With that, don't be afraid of making mistakes, especially for those of you, I think most people here are playing club of some level. Use lead to make yourself better, and you make yourself better by making mistakes, or use your practice for making yourself better. I coached U of A with Al for a bit, and I know one thing he had that was really good was he had the drills that we're going to work on improving our own skills, and then the drills that we're going to work on to focus on executing properly. So if you have that opportunity to work on developing your skills, that's when you make mistakes. You push yourself to be better, make mistakes that way, you're going to improve. All right. And then as I mentioned with one of the questions before, if you are going out to your league team and you're like, oh, I have all these things I've learned from the EUPA webinars and I want to share it with my teammates, make sure they actually want that information. So maybe when you're doing introduction, be like, hey, if anyone wants help with anything, feel free to ask me, instead of like going up to someone that you don't know and just saying like, you need to do this better, you need to do this different, you need to do this different. They may have learned a different way. They may be there just to like go run around with some friends and have beer after the game. Like, make sure if you are helping people, they actually want to be helped. And then similarly, don't overwhelm them with so much info. So pick 1 or 2 things per day to focus on with them, but then also make sure you comment on a lot of things doing well. So if you're saying, okay, try and put a bit sharper angle on your cuts when you make a turn, if they do that, make sure you let them know. So just kind of don't like over intimidate people coming out to league. If you're in a team practice scenario, that's a bit of a different situation because you know everyone is signing up there to be part of a team that's looking to be a bit more competitive in some way or other. So you kind of have that given assumption that they want to improve. But again, still, if you have new players there, make sure that you don't have 12 people on your team all trying to help them out because it can get overwhelming. Cool. All right, any other questions? Oh, sorry, that's a way back question. Throwing to a laterally moving target is harder than one coming at you. So I'm going to try, where's there? Let's try this. All right, so if we have this player cutting across here laterally, so if you're going to throw a pass to them that's going this way, that point where you have them, assuming they're moving at a decent speed, you kind of have a very small point where you can throw at them where they're going to catch it. So if you throw a pass here and it's not kind of in this area, it's going to be really hard for them to catch it. Whereas if someone's coming up here and you make that pass and it's not directly, they have a bit more of a range to adjust their cutting angle to catch a pass. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I guess when you're dealing with newer players, is that something, especially with really beginner players, like there's always that juggle of giving too much information when they ask the question and giving not enough, right?
Yeah.
So then, you know, as far as how would you, if you've got like say a brand new group of kids at a school and they're learning to play Ultimate for the first time, what kind of cutting advice would you give them? Like what would be their first kind of go-to objective, cutting objective?
I guess when I teach cutting to younger kids, I kind of focus on saying like we want our cuts to go up and down the field a bit more. So they should be cutting like towards the end zone and back to the disc as opposed to across. I find that works with younger kids anyways. Trying to think, I would say it probably work well with adults as well, as starting that like our cutting motion moves in this direction. And then you can get later into the point of like, okay, well, if you're in a position here where you're directly in front of the disc, it might be a better idea to make that clearing cut to either side. But I mean, if they're here and they decide to cut out of the way that way, it's not a great throwing angle for them. They may take away a deep pass to someone else, but doing that instead of a lateral cut they're both better than just standing right there. So it's, I would say kind of just staying focused on those lateral cuts down towards the end zone and back is better for starting players. And then you can get into the other positions of like, well, if you're here, you have the option for lateral cuts as well.
Mm. And then I guess adding that like check mark or triangles, layering that afterwards of like, oh, I've cut away and now where do I go after?
Yeah. And it depends on like where they've come from too. Like different sports, that's like that cutting thing is a lot easier to transition as opposed to someone who hasn't played like a team sport or a field sport before. It can be a totally new concept. So even getting them like going in one direction is a good start.
Would you like between, if you had to start one offensive strategy, whether it's vertical or horizontal, and you had a group of new players, do you find one that's easier to explain or for them to grasp, like kind of on average?
I find vertical I find is a bit easier to work well with newer players because that resting space is always the same. It's always in the middle of the field, where in horizontal, it's kind of in that like 10 yards away from the disc. But then if you're 10 yards away from the disc and the disc is right in front of you, that's not a good resting space. You should go somewhere else. So I find vertical is a bit better for kind of the basics of like you're brand new to the game, cut on either side. If you don't get open, go back to the middle. Horizontal, I find long-term makes better team cutters, like I'm a bit more aware of the timing, cutting off of other people and using the space that's available. So it depends. If you have like a bunch of new players that are like pretty good athletes in other field sports, you maybe try horizontal. But if you have a bunch of people who haven't played a lot before, then maybe try vertical. And there's like so many other factors that you can bring in that may benefit that particular group of people, but not others.
And I guess too, like if folks are kind of like, oh, I'm getting so tired, then it's that resting space is so important to have.
Yeah, for sure.
Any other questions from folks? You can tap them. And since we're at the end, you can feel free to unmute yourself and speak. But while people are thinking about their questions, Kaylee's posted in the chat, we have a survey. So to help us kind of improve our future clinics, do click on the link and answer our survey questions. It's like right there in the chat for you. So you can do that right now if you want. And then Jenn as well has a QR code to access the presentation. So I know for myself, like understanding things visually is really important. And I think what I really enjoy about the virtual clinics that we don't quite get an opportunity to when we have the live ones at like a physical field is like that play footage, right? You being able to present images and videos and then us thinking about watching a game critically, especially on the more kind of recreational league level. You know, we're not watching ourselves play. We may be watching other teams play, but usually you're in the thick of it and not quite kind of taking such a critical thinking approach to the game. So
Yeah,
definitely really helpful.
Yeah, I really like looking back at it, and like you watch things eventually and then it's like, oh wait, how did that happen? And then you can go back and look, okay, oh, that's how they set up that cut and how that space opened up. Yeah, it's watching film is definitely great for the stuff that's hard to drill, like the field awareness and decision making and things like that. Was this like what you were expecting? If anyone wants to give me like thumbs up, thumbs down, anything you wanted me to touch on that I didn't? Did I just waste an hour of your time?
I think it's definitely great to kind of review concepts and kind of see them drawn out visually. And I think a lot of the pointers that you talk about, like self-improvement or how to help others, is really important. Like that idea of not just helping people that didn't ask for your help, because they, like you said, just might want to be there to just run around a little bit, get some exercise, and ultimate is maybe secondary to that objective, right? And then I think too, just individual, like the focusing on that, individual improvement. If you train your body, the movements and the concepts, or even work through your mind in like a picture, what should happen, then when you're actually out there running around and you don't have time to think about anything, it becomes more automatic and it's less stressful.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. Even like on the coaching side of things. So the NCCP course didn't come out until I was coaching for a few years. And so going through that, it's like, yep, I made like almost all these mistakes you pointed out here, which would have been great to know if this existed like before I started coaching. So same thing, like I said, that thing of like, don't overwhelm people, because I've done it myself so many times of like trying to say every little thing that you can improve on, and then just like, wait a second, like let them kind of lead their own learning. And if they want more help, then go from there. But yeah, other than that, I wouldn't offer more than like a tip or two. And that's like on teams I'm a designated coach at. I still won't go like and try and overwhelm people with like all the different feedback. But I've had that with U of A as well, because at the beginning there's so many people and I need people to help. And that's something I need to be clear on, is like, I know there's like so much knowledge you have that you want to share, but some people have never seen this sport before. So like talking about things like clearing cuts and picks, and like, I was like, if you can get a stall count and like a backhand, that's good for the first week or two.
Yeah. There's a time limit. You can't wait too long.
Yeah. Yeah. Let's not talk about like stacks and end zones and things like that. But, yeah.
Great. There's lots of good comments. I don't think there's any other questions. So just a reminder for everyone to fill in the survey. And then feel free to also write us if you have kind of more lengthy comments that don't quite fit in the survey. So great. Hopefully we'll see you all in 2 weeks' time. Will be the women's panel, which is not a clinic, but it is a panel. And then afterwards, it'll be 3 weeks' time. We'll have another virtual clinic with Greg King.
Awesome. I may email there too if you have any other questions you didn't want to type in front of everyone. Do you want me to put the link for this in there as well, or?
Yeah, that would be great.
Okay.